Hello, guys. Miss Ray is trying to continue reading the BFG. I don't want to continue reading without you guys, so I thought I would record 1 or 2 chapters a day so we could get this going and see if we can finish and start a new chapter book in the next few weeks. I have a couple lined up for us, and I wanted to make sure that we're all remembering the BFG because we started it and it was a fun book. So I'm going to read about 1 or 2 chapters a day, trying to, and if it's not every day, it's going to be every other day, okay? Just to give you guys a little recap, Sophie is currently with the giant. They just went over all the things that the BFG can eat, which are a bunch of vegetables because he's a vegetarian. And so they just were talking about like the different type of veggies and the snoz cumbers and all that kind of stuff. But we are on page 55 for those who have the book. I know some of you don't, and that's okay. I'm going to be reading it. I'll read really slow. But for those who have the book, I want you to make sure that you're on the same page. So, suddenly a tremendous thumping noise came from outside the cave entrance, and a voice like thunder shouted, "Runt, is you there, Runt? I is hearing you jambling. Who is you jambling to, Runt?" "Oh, look out!" cried the BFG. "It's the bottler." But before he had finished speaking, the stone was rolled aside and a 50-foot giant, more than twice as tall and wide as the BFG, came striding into the cave. He was very dirty from top to bottom. Sophie was on the tabletop. The enormous, partly eaten snozcumber was lying near her. She ducked behind it. The creature came clumping into the cave and stood towering over the BFG. "Who was you jambling to in here just now?" he boomed. I is jambling to myself," the BFG answered. "Pivel fizz," shouted the bottler. "Bug swallow," he boomed. "You is talking to a human being. That's what I is thinking." No," cried the BFG. Yus," boomed the bottler. "I is guessing you has snitched away a human being and brought it back to your bunghole as a pet. So now I is winkling it out and guzzling it as extra snacks before my supper." The poor BFG was nervous. "There's no one in here," he stammered. Why don't you just leave me alone?" The bottler pointed a finger as large as his tree trunk at the BFG. "Runty little scum screwer," he shouted. "Piddling little swish figgler. Squimpy little bottle wart. Prunty little pog swizzler. I is now going to search the primroses." He grabbed the BFG by the arm. "And you is going to help me do it. Us together is going to winkle out this tasteful little human being," he shouted. The BFG had intended to whisk Sophie off the table as soon as he got the chance and hide her behind his back. But now there was no hope of doing this. Sophie peered around the chewed-off end of the enormous snozcumber and watched the 2 giants as they moved away down the cave. The bottler was a gruesome sight. His skin was reddish-brown. There was black hair sprouting on his arms. The hair on his head was long and dark and tangled. His foul face was round and squashy-looking. The eyes were tiny black holes. The nose was small and flat, but the mouth was huge. It spread right across the face, almost ear to ear, and it had lips that were like 2 gigantic purple frankfurters lying out on top of the other. Craggy yellow teeth stuck out between the 2 purple frankfurter lips. and rivers of spit ran down over the chin. It was not in the least difficult to believe that this ghastly brute ate men, women, and children every night. The bottler, still holding the BFG by the arm, was examining the rows and rows of bottles. "You and your pibbling bottles," he shouted. "What is you putting in them?" "That? What? Nothing that would interest you," the BFG answered. "You is only interested in guzzling human beings." "And you is a dotty as a dog swoggler," cried the bottler. Soon the bottler would be coming back. Sophie told herself he was bound to search the tabletop, but she couldn't possibly jump off the table. It was 12 feet high. She'd break a leg. The snozzcumber, although it was as thick as a perambulator, was not going to hide her if the bottler picked it up. She examined the chewed-off end. It had large seeds in the middle, each one as big as a melon. They were embedded in soft, slimy stuff, taking care to stay out of sight. Sophie reached forward and scooped away half a dozen of these seeds. This left a hole in the middle of the snozzcumber, large enough for her to crouch in so long as she rolled herself up into a ball. She crawled into it. It was a wet and slimy hiding place, but what did that matter if it was going to save her from being eaten? The bottler and the BFG were coming back towards the table now. The BFG was nearly fainting with fear. Any moment, he was telling himself, Sophie would be discovered and eaten. Suddenly, the bottler grabbed the half-eaten snozzcumber. The BFG stared at the bare table. "Sophie, where is you?" he thought desperately. "You cannot possibly be jumping off that high table, so where is you hiding, Sophie?" "So this is the filthy, rotten glubbage you is eating," boomed the blood bottler, holding up the partly eaten snozzcumber. "You must be guzzling such rob squash." For a moment, the bottler seemed to have forgotten about his search for Sophie. The BFG decided to lead him further off the track. "That is the scrum-diddly-umptious snozzcumber," he said. "I is guzzling it gleefully every night and day. Is you never trying a snozzcumber, bottler?" "Human beans is juicier," the bottler said. "You is talking Romney tot," the BFG said, growing braver by the second. He was thinking that if only he could get the bottler to take one bite of the repulsive vegetable, the sheer foulness of its flavor would send him bellowing out of the cave. "I is happy to let you sample it," the BFG went on. "But please, when you see how truly glumptious it is, do not be guzzling the whole thing. Leave me a little snitchet for my supper." The bottler stared suspiciously with small piggy eyes at the snozzcumber. Sophie, crouching inside the chewed-off end, began to tremble all over. "You is not switch-fiddling me, is you?" said the bottler. "Oh, never!" cried the BFG passionately. "Take a bite, and I am positive you will be shouting out, 'Oh, how scrum-diddly-umptious Wonderveg is!'" The BFG could see the greedy bottler's mouth beginning to water more than ever at the prospect of extra food. "Vegetables is very good for you," he went on. "It is not healthsome always to be eating meat things." "Just this once," the bottler said. "I is going to taste these rotsome eats of yours, but I is warning you that if it is filthsome, I is smashing it over your sludgy head." He picked up the snozzcumber. He began raising it on its long journey to his mouth, some 50 feet up in the air. Sophie wanted to scream, "Don't!" But that would have been an even more certain death. Crouching among the slimy seeds, she felt herself being lifted up and up and up. Suddenly there was a crunch as the bottler bit a huge hunk off the end. Sophie saw his yellow teeth clamping it together. A few inches from her head, Then there was utter darkness. She was in his mouth. She caught a whiff of his evil-smelling breath. It stank of bad meat. She waited for the teeth to go crunch one more. She prayed that she would be gone quickly. "Ew!" roared the bottler. "Ugwelch!" And then he spat all of the great lumps of snozzcumber that were in his mouth, as well as Sophie herself, went shooting across the cave. If Sophie had struck the stony wall of the cave, she would most certainly have been gone. Instead, she hit the soft folds of the BFG's black cloak hanging against the wall. She dropped to the ground half stunned. She crawled under the hem of the cloak, and there she crouched. "You little swine bugler!" roared the bottler. "You little pig swiller!" He rushed at the BFG and smashed what was left of the snozzcumber over his head. Fragments of the filthy vegetables splashed all over the cave. "You is not loving it?" the BFG asked innocently, rubbing his head. "Loving it?" yelled the bottler. "That is the most disgusterous taste that is ever touching my teeth. You must be Buggles to be swalloping sludge like that. Every night you could be galloping off, happy as a hamburger, and gobbling human beings." "Eating human beings is wrong and evil," the BFG said. "It is guzzly and glumptuous," shouted the bottler. "And tonight is galloping off to Chile to swabble a few human chili beans. Is you wishing to know why I is choosing Chile?" "I is not wishing to know anything," the BFG said, very dignified. "I is choosing Chile," the bottler said, "because I is fed up with the taste of others. It is important I eat plenty of cold eats in this scuttling hot weather, and the next coldest thing to others is chili bean. Human beings from Chile is very chilly." "Ugh, horrible," the BFG said. "You ought to be ashamed. Other giants is all saying they is wanting to gallop off to England tonight to guzzle school childers." The bottler said, "I is very fond indeed of English school childers. They has a nice inky booky flavor. Perhaps I will change my name and go to England with them." "Ugh, you is disgusting," the BFG said. "And you is an insult to the giant people," shouted the bottler. "You is not fit to be a giant. You is a squinky little squidler. You is a pibbling little pipsqueak. You is a cream puff nut." With that horrible bottling giant strode out of the cave. The BFG ran to the cave entrance and quickly rolled the stone back into place. "Sophie," he whispered. "Sophie, where is you, Sophie?" Sophie emerged from under the hem of the black cloak. "I'm here," she said. The BFG picked her up and held her tenderly in the palm of his hand. "Oh, I is so happy to be finding you all in one lump," he said. "I was in his mouth," Sophie said. "You was what?" cried the BFG. Sophie told him what had happened, and there I was telling him to eat the filthsome snozzcumber, and you was all the time inside it, the BFG cried. "Not much fun," Sophie said. "Just look at you, you poor little childer," cried the BFG. "You was all covered in snozzcumber and giant spit." He set about cleaning her up as best he could. "I is hating those other giants more than ever now," he said. "You know what I should like?" "What?" Sophie said. "I should like to find a way of disappearing them, every single one." "I'd be glad to help you," Sophie said. "Let me see if I can think up a way of doing it." And that is the end. If you have your book, you should stick your bookmark in and you should be on page 64. Stay tuned for another one tomorrow, my friends.